Hello, my friends. Welcome to the last session of the year. In fact, we are running the Kotlin for the server side webinar series. It's a series for this year, and it's the last session for this series, and it's the last session for the whole year as well. I just learned that we have hosted 83 webinars at JetBrains today, this year. So this one is the 80th webinar for 2021. So this session is going to be about Ktor, and it's going to be about a couple of features Ktor, and well, it's not an introduction, of course. We have hosted webinars about Ktor before, the intro one, some specific dedicated webinars, and in this case, let me remind you what was happening. We have this webinar, and yes, like in this series, we have object detection with image recognition with Kotlin. It was demonstrating Kotlin deep library, very nice library, but the demo was actually introduced Ktor. And last week we also had folks from 37 degrees from Arrow KTT demonstrating how you can do functional programming with Kotlin, and the demo was also with Ktor. So it wasn't planned in the beginning, but it was very nice surprise to see all the demos using Ktor in one or another. And today I'm going to walk through building a chat application with WebSockets on top of Ktor. And I'm to use that application as a base to add some database support as well. To remind you, we are on YouTube channel, so youtube.com/Kotlin. You can get the reading of this webinar there, and you can find all the other webinars there as well. If you want introduction to Ktor, you can find a corresponding video on this channel. So if you haven't subscribed yet, you should. What are we going to start with? We are to start with basically a blank sheet, and I have a project already prepared, so I'm not going to generate it from scratch. I have two parts in this project. I have a WebSocket chat, and I have a WebSocket client. It should be a command line client, so I'm going to start command line application to the service via WebSocket and do some interaction, but before to implement the service itself. And let's see what I already have in the project here. So the service side, I have an application, and we are going to learn a few things, custom properties for Ktor as well. How can you implement your own configuration? I don't know, handling. Let's say you to add the database connection, and there is no feature in Ktor. It's an HTTP option toolkit, but we can add any library to our project. Like in this case, I'm going to using Exposed, and then we need some way to figure it, like to configure a database connection, maybe connection pooling, maybe something else, and then I need to invent a configuration format for myself. So this part here, configuration, like storage, driver name, your DB file path, and like EH file path, for instance. Those are custom properties. I will have to build a custom configuration handling for that, but I will get to that in this part of the session. First, I want to actually just start application and expose a web connection for the client to be able to connect. So where to start? We start in the application.conf, and we have a module configured, right? So that's the function that we should implement module. And as I said, we need start with WebSockets. It means that we install the feature, and in Ktor we have a specific WebSocket specific integration. That's a web plugin basically, and in Ktor we install features like or enable features like this using the install function, and we select the feature. As you can see, it's one of the things that I want to demonstrate you in the plugin as well. I have Ktor plugin right now installed in my IntelliJ, and this plugin actually helps a little bit auto completion and code generation for me in those small places. This is like the first steps we are adding the Ktor plugin in IntelliJ. It can do some things, not much yet, but in this case, you can see auto completion gives me a list of features I can actually use, not just any classes, right? And if I select WebSockets, it actually will generate me configuration part as well, which is really neat. And because I might not know what are the properties there, and I will have to type thing. Someone is saying that the sound is a little bit broken. I hope I will, if I the microphone closer, it will be better. But bear with me; it might be the connection issue. So I generated this WebSocket install part, and next I will have to, start typing the code for handling the connections for my chat. So I need to define an endpoint using the WebSocket. Was it WebSocket? Ah, no, routing function. Of course, I need to use routing function. Then I can use WebSocket and define the endpoint. So chat is going to be a chat endpoint, and here I will start handling all the incoming messages, connections, and so on. So what should I do? Like whenever a connection comes in, whenever a new client is to my chat, I want to register it. So I keep track of all the connections coming to my chat, right? So what could I do? I could create some kind of a set, connections, something like this, set of, and then your connection class that I already prepared. But this is not synchronized, right? The connections might be added or to this set or removed during the lifetime of the application, and that's all current as we know. So maybe I should better thing like this. I add a synchronized set of connections. Let's take a look at the connection class for a second. It's basically a wrapper around the session, about a WebSocket session, and all it does is it keeps track of the number of connections created for this chat and increment number, and then generates a name for the user. So have a user 1, user 0, user 2, user 3, and so on. And whenever, why do I have to wrap the session? Because whenever I open this, whenever I handle socket interaction, I am in the context of the WebSocket server session. That's what I want to keep track of. So whenever a connection is created, like whenever a new basically upgrade command, upgrade to WebSocket happens, we're gonna create instance of that connection wrapper class and wrap this into it, and then register it the connections collection C. So I'm going to just add this session to my list. And then what should I do? I could start receiving the frames, right? Receiving the bit frames, for instance, or I can also greet the user when, for instance, this session. So we whatever connection we just received, whenever a new user comes, we want to greet him, right? So we get this connection and send a greeting message, for instance. Welcome to the chat. There we're gonna say how many users there are online. Connections size, users are online. Okay. Let me close left-hand side. And so we have the user, he comes, we greet him, and we now can start seeing the incoming messages where they come in, and then sending those messages there to all the connections that we have in the chat. So inside this WebSocket session, I have a variable called incoming. That's basically it's a receive channel of frame. So we're gonna read the messages from that channel, and it's actually implementing the, let me see, it's implementing the, there was something like an iterator, but anyways, it's possible to run a for loop to iterate over the incoming channel like this. I mean, let me see if there are any questions yet. Okay, we were iterating over the frames, right? And we are working with text messages, so we should check if it's a text message, right? And the frame, like there is a frame dot type, something like text or something else. Let me see, like text. If I go to definition, for instance, this one might be text, it might be binary, it might be something else. So we just check the type of that specific frame that we get from the incoming channel, and if it's not text, we just continue, right? We are not interested in any other messages. And if it is text, then we probably want to just read the message out of the frame, compose a message together with the connection name. So you would see in the chat that someone is saying something, not just like a raw message, but you would see a username who actually sent the message, right? Like val message, and then you're gonna say connection name and the text we just read from the frame. And then all we need to do is to send this message further to other connections, and basically to all connections that are registered in our chat right now. So connections, we can do it multiple ways. We can just write a for loop over the connection set, or we can use the for each function, because like in this case, we already are in the loop, and writing multiple loops nested, it's not fun. So let's use this for each function instead. So every session should receive this message. Sorry, message like this. So that's a simple code, right? There is nothing really special about it just yet, and it's not going to be. It's all like very simple here. Can we actually test it now? Maybe we just could run this application. Let's see. It's starting. Okay. So the application is running on port 8080. It started pretty fast. It was building a little bit slowly. Let's see, where is my browser window that I can show you for the chat. Can I somehow move it here? Oh, yeah. I have a browser window right here. So I actually have a WebSocket. I think I used to have WebSocket Client in the browser. That's the extension I wanted to use to connect to my localhost 8080 chat, and then all I need to do is to connect. We should receive a greeting message, right? Welcome to the chat. One users are online. That's the single connection. That's us, and we can send the message. This client actually requires me to type messages in JSON format, but well, it's a bit inconvenient. Like this, hello, send the message. Good. So if we open more of chats like this, it's going to work. Let's look into the client side. Like we wanted to implement the client as well. So that's the service, and that's the client we are going to use to connect from the command line. So it's basically the same way as with the server. Basically the same way. Let me see. There was a question if JSON is also text. Yes, JSON is also text. Okay, where's the chat? Okay. Now, so Ktor provides the server part. We can build server applications, and we can build client-side applications. And the client-side library of Ktor is actually multi-platform. We can use it for JVM applications, for iOS applications, even for JS and Android. And here we are just using it for JVM. So we have a client that it's going to use WebSockets feature, so we have to install the WebSocket as well. For some reason, the auto-completion is not implemented yet for the client side as it was for the server side, but I hope it will be added soon as well. So we are going to define this client that is going to use WebSockets, and now I can connect to WebSocket to port 8080 path chat. And you can see the IDE tells me that something is wrong. It underlines the WebSocket invocation with red. What's wrong there? Because it's a suspend function, and suspend function needs to be executed from the proper context. And in this case, since it's just a command line client, I can just use run blocking to launch it like this. Oh, good. Okay. So what I need to do now is to read the messages from the command line. It's a command line client. I need to type something in and be able to send it to everybody in the chat, to the chat server, and that's going to happen continuously, right? So it's going to happen in a infinite loop like this. And here I need to read in some text from the command line. I'm using Kotlin 1.6, so I already have this readline function, the new one from the standard library, where I don't have to check for null. Like, remember, we used to have this readline function, which returns a nullable string like this, and the readline function returns a proper string. Let's see, explicitly, it's just a string. Right, I don't have to check for now, and then I can just send this message to everybody in the chat, right? Like, I type something in, I hit enter, and it goes to the service, and all the clients should receive this. And the other part is actually receiving the messages like this, incoming, or maybe even like this. It doesn't matter right now because it's the code I'm writing right now is incorrect on purpose. I will explain why. So let's iterate over the incoming channel. Iterate over the channel, get the frames. Basically the same way we need to check if the frame is a text frame, and if it's not, we are not interested in that, and going to print the message that we receive to the command line. That's read text basically. Get me, let's get that like this. All right, so what's wrong with this? Those two activities are should not be connected to each other. They should be asynchronous in relation to each other. Basically means we need to launch a dedicated coroutine for the specific activity. Otherwise, if we launch this client this way as we have written the code, we could not start receiving the messages before we actually send the message, and vice versa. Before the if we change those statements like this, sorry, like this, it means we are going to be stuck receiving the messages but not going to be able to send anything. That's bad. So what should we do? It should be like this. We should put those two activities separately, and basically uh, wrap them into launch calls like this. Launch, those will be incoming messages job, and in here it's going to be outgoing. No, wait, I was wrong. Those are like outgoing messages, and these are incoming messages. Sorry, incoming messages. Those are outgoing messages. Outgoing messages. Incoming messages. And since this is just like a declaration, yes, we launched the coroutine, but we need to somehow uh, basically get the flow back into this main flow, right? Uh, for instance, like how should we end the application? How should we exit the program here? We could check if the text is exit, and then we could just return from the launch function, basically meaning that we are going to return from this block, and it's going to end, right? Then sending messages does not work anymore, and for that we need to get some point back to the application, like this: outgoing messages join. So we are going to join back in this place. And after we join on the outgoing messages, we need to cancel receiving the messages from the chat, from the incoming messages. So incoming messages, we're going to cancel and join like this. So this is basically our client for the command line to send and receive messages over the WebSockets. Let's run it. Let's check how does it work. Okay, two users are online. We are still the service was still running, and we still have this browser open with the connection. Let's see if I type something here. Hello. User one is saying hello, and the other one has received the message. Cool. It seems to be working, and this is exactly what we wanted to get. So is there any questions or comments in the chat? Yeah, there was like exactly the question about the incoming channel that we are iterating over the connections. Or no, so sorry, it's like we are iterating on connections only if connection is open, how we will receive updates if somebody else send the message. I can't really tell the machinery behind the incoming messages queue in Ktor, but I guess it's just going to be enqueued, and whenever there is a timing to read from the queue, then we're gonna receive the message. Okay, there weren't any more There weren't any more. Yeah, it's basically the same for server and client. It doesn't matter. It uses the same API. Okay, let's proceed. It's just the first part, right? We created the service. We have a command line client. We actually can use the browser client as well. We haven't implemented a database connection. We haven't implemented persistence. So whenever a new client connects to the chat, he doesn't see any history, right? It would be cool if I connect to the chat and I get all the messages that were previously added to the chat, right? So what should I do? I obviously need a database, right? Let's go. Let me check the chat again. Okay, that should be a little bit larger font, I think. Well, it doesn't matter right now because we are going to look at this a bit later. Let's see, where was it? So I'm going to use the exposed library. Let me tell you a few things. So that's a library for connecting to the database and working with databases, and it uses its own DSL to generate the statements. So you write Kotlin statements and get SQL statements out of that, uh, generated on the fly. And it supports multiple databases like H2, MySQL, Oracle, Postgres, and so on. And it's pretty easy to start. And it's not related to Ktor. Ktor is just like a HTTP toolkit, and we could use any other library to connect to the databases. So I'm going. My goal today is just to give you like pointers, basically, to learn a little bit about the exposed library, how to add it into your project, and where to get started. And if you need some advanced options, you will probably have to read the documentation and talk in a Slack channel. Actually, in a Kotlin Slack, we have a dedicated channel for exposed, of course. Let's see. We have, and I already have this code written, so you wouldn't have to wait for me typing all this code. I have browsed many different projects at GitHub, looking for like patterns, how people use this library, and the main like theme there is that they are using this database access object pattern to use exposed with Ktor. So let's take a look. We have a database KT class here, file actually, and usually all you need to do is to call this function to get connected to database by using the exposed library. So database.connect is the entry point for you. And you need to supply this JDBC URL and driver class name to be able to connect. Where do we get those? Obviously, we could just hard code it and spend no time, configuring or finding out how to put like custom properties. But I think it's a good thing to talk about here is to like we need somehow to read it from the external configuration, right? And the external configuration here is the application.conf because we're already using Ktor. It's a good place to put your database properties. Why not? And the standard configuration for Ktor is this Ktor block here, right? And this storage block is currently invented. It's a custom one, and it only works with my application because I have written code for that. So I define the driver class name, the URL, the database path where I should store the files, and then in my database file where I connect to the database, I should supply the application config. Application config is the internal class that represents the configuration of Ktor. Whenever we read the properties, the application.conf in, this application config is going to have all the references that we need. Where do I get it from? That's a good question. And it's actually right here. So when we implement a module function, it's an extension function to the application. And inside the application, we have a reference to, we have a reference to environment, like this, and then config. So that's exactly what we need. That's the application config. Let's check the type. That's the application config. So let me remove this. So all we need is to call the database connection logic, not install, sorry, init database, and supply a reference to the application config from within the application context. Is that clear? I hope it is. So if we go to this function definition here, let me see. So we read in the properties. We can use the reference to the application config, call property, and give it a name. The name is a composed name from all the levels, from all the nested levels in your configuration. So let me open the configuration file. I have storage on the first level, and driver class name is a nested property in my config. So to reference that property, I need to write storage.driver class name. Let me see the database class, the database file, storage dot driver class name. Same for URLs, or same for the other properties. So if I need to need to reference some nested property, I'm going to use this notation. Okay, and next, all I need to do is to create a Hikari data source. That's just a function, I supply it here. That's just the API for Hikari, nothing special, nothing Ktor specific here, nothing exposed specific here as well. So those are just like settings that I need to provide to initialize Hikari data source. And at the end, I'm using this validate function to check if my configuration was correct. This validate function comes from Hikari as well. So that's the internal function. And after I connect to the database, so I basically initialize the internals, like internal singletons of Exposed. And then I can run any statements and use this transaction block to either define the transactional scope, or if I want to connect to multiple databases, for instance, like this, database, for instance, 1. Let me join the strings here. So DB1. And if I had a second database, for instance, then I could supply this reference to the transaction function as a parameter and say that this block should be executed in the scope of that specific connection, right? If I want to use multiple connections to the databases, then I should keep track of those references, of those connections. Somehow I would probably extract it into a singleton and then be able to connect to any of those references. All right. So let's remove that, and I don't need this as well because I only have one database, and that's going to be default. There is a good comment about the blocking call. Yes, Exposed is mostly a blocking library, and at the startup, like, we don't really care if it's asynchronous or not. We are more like worrying about the asynchronous nature of execution when the application is already running. So there was a good question or a good comment about new suspended transaction. We are going to get to that when we actually work with database objects. Okay, so we initialize the connection, we connect to the database, and now basically we should start working with the database depending on what we need, right? So we have messages, we want to store the messages, and we in exposed we should model those messages, using classes or objects. We can derive from the table class, which is coming from exposed. That's the library or table. Yeah, that's the table from exposed library. And I'm going to define basically this messages object, and then I'm going to work with that to read data from the database and insert something to the database. How I'm going to do that? I'm going to use this database access object pattern, which is implemented depending on the domain operations, whatever you have in your application. This is something like a very minimal implementation of it. We could have like a DAO facade with a couple of functions, function declarations. That's the interface. And then we are going to implement that. Honestly, in my simple example here, I don't really need an interface. I could just use like just one implementation with functions directly. And inside those functions, we are actually using this messages object, and they're calling the insert. So that's the DSL that Exposed provides. Let me check in the documentation right here. Like this is the README file. Can I? Okay. So if you are new to Exposed, it's a good idea to check the samples here in the GitHub README file, and of course there is like a longer documentation with various examples how to implement something in this DSL. Okay, let's get back to the project. Now, in my application, what should I do? I should create the instance of that DAO facade input. DAO facade input. I don't need to supply anything there because I already initialized connection to the database, and whenever I execute something by using the object that implements table class, it's going to use the default connection internally, default transaction, and so on. But if I want to do that asynchronously, that's a good comment in the chat. I'm going to use this helper function that I've implemented for my project DB query, and that one is using the new suspended transaction and use the dispatchers.io to as a scope for executing this statement. Right, so this execution is going to be asynchronous. All right, so where's my application? I connect to the database. I initialize the database access object, and then whenever my new connection or new user connects to my chat, I want to send him all the messages that I have in my application, like get messages, and for each message, I'm going to send the message to the user, like this. So when I connect, I get all the history, and same with the message that I receive from someone, like during the operation. I want to store it for history. Then db save message, just going to work like this. Basically, that is all I need to implement persistence in my database and be able to provide history in my chat. And as you can see, that's all asynchronous already. Like we have all those arrows on the left. Okay, I'm not going to spend time testing it. I hope you believe me that it's working, and I'm going to put this into the description of this recording as well. So later you can check out the project, check out the sample project and how it works. Meanwhile, let me check if you have any questions. Okay, there are comments, but are there any questions? Okay, I don't see anything. All right. Oh, you redirected transaction execution to IO threads. That what happens with the thread local connection that is used internally when multiple coroutines share the same IO thread? It's a very good question. I have no answer for. Local connection. Well, if to answer this question, I need to dig into the sources, and I haven't. So sorry for that. No answer right now. How would this config work with a production deployment and confidential passwords? So basically, of course, you don't want to put passwords into your configuration file, but out of the box, there is support for environment variables, and we can put in a placeholder for the environment variable, like we have it for the port right here. So, for instance, we can define the default port, but if you want to read something from the environment, we can use it like this with this syntax, right? Dollar and then the name of the environment variable. It's the same way. So I guess we could use it the same way for the passwords. Can we load something externally? I don't really get the question. If we could load something externally, we can probably implement some library that at the startup reads the configuration from some source, like configuration source, and then gets all the properties for operation. I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but I hope it kind of answers like a question that I just made up. Any more questions? Not yet. So, folks, this was the 45 minutes of fun session. I hope you learned something and it was useful. We have implemented the WebSocket chat, right? So we implemented the server side part of it. It's asynchronous. We have implemented the client side, client chat, command line client for the chat. It also works asynchronously, and we have seen like two processes, like sending messages and receiving the messages, and then we added some persistence to our chat as well. Oh, there are more questions coming. Can we load application.conf using Kubernetes config maps? Oh, that's interesting. I guess you need to implement some custom module for that to actually read in something from Kubernetes config maps. Does it? I'm not sure if it maps to the environment. Then if it maps, then probably you can just use it as is with those environment properties. But otherwise, I'm not sure. There is a question: how, if we are looping over the frames in the incoming channel, I guess
We only had that for the frames. If the connection, like as long as the connection is open, but how job canceling breaks the loop, we are I'm not exactly sure, but probably when we call cancel and join, then it basically closes the channel. It should be like that. What do I think about Juke? Juke is a very nice library. I mean, use it if you like it. And the purpose of this webinar was to talk about Exposed, but we can as well talk about Juke. And in fact, I think we could even invite Lucas to talk about Juke with Kotlin. That will be a very fun session. I hope. Is there any feature or plugin of Swagger documentation in Ktor? This is also a very good question. I was just asking it in the chat before the session. What are the plans for the team regarding OpenAPI and Swagger? Currently, there are generators, right? You can generate the application code based on Swagger or OpenAPI definition, but there is no generator of the documentation based on your routes in your application. So if you have application and you want to generate some documentation of your REST API, then there is no generator for that. There was some sort of a third-party effort that is abandoned, and as far as I know, we just started implementing this functionality inside the plugin. So you're going to be able to generate the documentation using the plugin, but not at the runtime. The This is a complex. This is a very complex problem actually, because the way the routes are defined are all with the code. We actually have to implement a complex code analysis plugin to analyze all the routes, whatever is happening in there, whatever objects are defined in the routes, to be able to generate something like documentation for documentation based on the routes. And it's just, it's possible to implement, but it's a nightmare to maintain. So the team decided that this will be implemented as a plugin for the ID, based like on a static analysis that is already in the ID, instead of implementing a compiler plugin for Ktor. And it's starting. It's not implemented yet, so I hope in some time we are going to have this functionality. Is there any plans to use Flow for WebSocket incoming? At the moment, I'm doing it as consume as Flow. Well, it's a good question. I think regarding the plans for the API, it makes sense to ask from Ktor channel in Kotlin Slack, because all the developers are there, and they are actually working on 2.0 for Ktor, and that might be a very good input for them. So I'd encourage you to join the Slack channel for Ktor and ask the team. Does Exposed play well with database migration tools like Liquibase or Flyway? Yes. In fact, there is no need to use them somehow jointly. I have seen examples where we initialize the connection as we did, read in the properties, call the database.connection, and then run the API for Flyweight, and that's it. There is no huge need to integrate something. But well, I might be wrong, but I have seen the examples, and it didn't seem to be something complicated at all. Is there support for high availability in Ktor that would eliminate the need for Swagger? That's a bit strange question to me, because high availability and Swagger, how do you connect them together? I don't know. Let's break them separately. High availability, you implement like not using Ktor itself, but probably with distributed caching and distributed messaging, and then running your application in containers. That's it. And how could high availability eliminate the need for Swagger? I don't know. Sorry. Why no Discord? It's a good question. Why no Discord? I guess the community is free to set up any environment for information sharing. If someone wants to start a Discord server, then they are free to do so. It's just that ages ago we started Slack for communication with the users, and there is a Ktor channel, so for historical reasons, basically. Is there plans to support native image on all servers, not only CIO? I have seen examples creating native. I guess it's about GraalVM native image. I have seen examples with any, not with CIO, but with Netty, I guess, creating GraalVM native images with Ktor, even with older versions. And sorry, I don't really get the question, the context of the question here. Oh, how is not a high availability but extension for REST? Sorry, my bad. I probably misunderstood something, but then I don't really have any question then. Or sorry, no answer. I can't tell you. The exposed ready to GraalVM native image build? Yes, there are examples for that. And like if you check the roadmap for 2.0, GraalVM, not GraalVM, but Ktor 2.0 at some point is planning to support Kotlin native. So it's going to be multi-platform as well. Those are different things, I know. Like with GraalVM native image, you still keep all the ecosystem of libraries, of Java libraries that you might want to use on JVM, but then compile it to a native image. But then there is just an interesting use case, like you will be able to compile Ktor server application into a native application that will be very, very small, and probably will be able to run on very small devices. Yes, GraalVM native image might not work really well if you use Jetty, but I think you should supply a configuration file for reflection, and then it should work. But probably getting this configuration file is a little bit of a hassle, but should be automated as far as I know. Like run the application for a few hours, bomb it with all possible requests, dump all the reflection calls and put them into configuration file, and then native image should be possible to generate native image with this configuration. There is a question about if the webinar is recorded and will stay on the channel. Of course, all these sessions are recorded, and everything is going to stay here. We are happy to share all kind of information with you, unedited. This will stay unedited with all my little breakups with the microphone today. Okay. Any more questions? All right. I think we should wrap it up here. It has been a fun hour. Thanks for your questions, guys. It's very nice to see you coming and chatting with me and asking questions. I hope you will join the Slack channel as well if you have more questions, and ask them from the team, because the team needs to have the input from the community. And with that, I'm going to wrap this session. This was the final session of the year. I hope you will have fun, celebrating at the end of the year, and have a nice evening. Bye.